An earlier story concerning the violence recorded in the 2020 elections, and the violence was that much that investigations are ongoing in some. The Center for Democratic Governance is today, as a result, holding a stakeholder engagement on a project they have titled Post-Elections Accountability on Election Security. The aim of the project is to track the status of electoral violence cases recorded in the 2020 elections, as well as to advocate for the speedy resolution of all the cases. CDD Ghana has, in a 7-page document, thrown light on some of the findings and recommendations. My colleague Dennis Pabri-Wedam has joined me in here to break this down for us. Dennis, good to have you. Let's start off with this. What are we looking at here?
Well, so this is a CDD report. They've done this together with ONEP and the NCCE, and they set out to track the status of election violence, especially for the 2020 general elections. This is against the background that for the past 8 elections that we have had, there's always been an incident of electoral violence, and they believe and they observe that there hasn't been any form of justice for people who have suffered some form of abuses or injustice in such instances. So they sought out to track what has happened in the 2020 general election.
So let's talk about the validity of a research like this or findings like this that is mainly based on the method adapted in getting the data. What did CDD adapt? And we'll get to what they found out shortly, but what method did they adapt in the research process?
Well, so per the reports, what they did was a dexed review of media reports on election-related violence and all of that. So they looked specifically at instances where there were violence, gun violence, destruction of property, and even shooting.
That's reported
from the media. Okay. Then what they did was to review all of those and then set out on the field to validate all of these things. In validation, they spoke to key stakeholders, including the Ghana Police Service, the victims and their families, and all those who matter in that space, and getting to a point where they track it in the justice system to see how far those cases have gone. So that is the methodology used by CDD in this particular exercise.
That brings us to the findings. Walk us through some of the findings from CDD.
Yeah, so from the findings, they found out that victims were found to have received some financial support from influential persons, notably from politically connected individuals. Okay. They also observed that the cases, of all the cases that they tracked, the victims or their families made no official complaints to the police stations, to the police.
All of the cases?
In almost all of them.
Okay.
Some of the cases that got to the police were on the initiative of the police themselves, who perhaps were present at the scenes, and they took it upon themselves to do it. But none of the family members or the victims themselves reported those incidents. There was also the finding of the families having no information about the status of the cases as it stands now. Even though some of them were injured, others even lost their lives, their families do not know the status of those cases. And largely, this report was also to fill that void. Again, out of the 12 cases...
Hold on, Dennis. We'll get to the other point. So if the families, most of them did not report the cases themselves, how did they develop the interest to follow up on the progress of the case?
Well, so that perhaps is the reason they don't even know the status of it. Because one of the findings is that they didn't report the cases. But of course, they got their way into police stations because some of the policemen were at the scene and they effected some arrest, and then they took some of those things, yes. So let me also mention that in all, they were looking at 12 cases that were validated to have happened. Of the 12 cases, they happened in 11 constituencies in 6 regions. So of all the 12 cases that were tracked, 4 of them have been confirmed to be in the law courts now. That is mean they are going through trial. 3 of them are still under investigation. 3 of them have been forwarded to the office of the AG for advice, and then 2 of them are said to have been settled by the parties themselves. That's like an out-of-court settlement. Right. So yeah, those are some of the findings that the CDD has come out with in this particular
CDD also made recommendations based on the findings. Walk us through a couple of them.
Yeah, so for recommendations, they are asking the Ghana Police Service to periodically provide a public with updates of the status of the cases. This, they believe, will engender confidence in the police of the work, the work of the police, and then of course it will promote transparency. They also want the cases to be expedited once they get into the CID Department for Investigations, because some of the cases we are told are still at the CID department. They feel that there should be a lot more speed in that. The AG is also, they also made the same appeal to the AG's office that once cases are forwarded to his department for advice for further prosecution, that action should be a bit more faster than we have it now. Also with court hearings, some of the cases have stuck in the law courts for as long as, I think in one case, the last appearance was in December 15. they've not gone to court again. They also want the courts to also speed up the process. Of course, they also mentioned continuous sensitization and public education on the effects
what happens to the recommendation by the NDC to establish, courts dedicated to follow up on electoral violence? Are we seeing any use of that in the CDD finding?
Well, the CDD did not make specific recommendation in that respect, but what they are saying is that there has to be a lot more speed than what we have right now. Of course, they also mentioned that it is pressure that has brought to bear that's caused some of these things to be happening. So it should not be the case that each time there's an election and there's violence, there should be pressure before prosecution and investigation should be done. They want the process to be done naturally, and it should be faster.
Does that give the impression that, they're talking about a lot of speed here from the AG, from the courts, from the police. Does that give the impression that we're seeing some, lackadaisical approach or a slow approach, slow tracking of the process? Are we thinking that it's not going as fast as we want it to be?
Yes, in subtle ways, that is what the report suggests, because they feel that some of these cases should have at least, even if not in prosecution, should have moved beyond investigation. But we still find that quite a number of the cases are still pending before the CID for investigation. They feel that it's not good enough.
Dennis, thank you. We're grateful for your time with us on the Bulletin. We've been speaking with my colleague Dennis Pabri Wedam. He is with the Research and Planning Department of the Newsroom.